Hey everyone, so for this video I'm going to go through and show you the method that I use to find the lands of my rifle and how I use that to set my bullet jump when I'm doing my initial load development. So to do it this way, a few things you're going to need is a reloading press with resizing and sizing die. You're also going to want a fired case that has not been resized yet, and you are going to want the bullet you are going to set your load development for. So the reason this is important is because the distance to your lands and your bullet seating is going to change based on the shape of the bullet. So you need to use the bullet that you are going to do your load development for. You also need to start off with an unsized case, because before you start you want the bullet to be able to freely slip into the case, because we'll add a little bit of tension here in a minute, and so we'll go over that in a second. So one other thing you're going to want is some calipers. With what I've got here is a bullet comparator. So this one's from Hornady. They've got caliber specific inserts, and what this does is this takes a measurement off the ogive of the bullet. So rather than taking your measurements off the point of the bullet, you're going to be taking them on the ogive, and that's because the nose of the bullet can vary in length by about 5/1000ths of an inch. I've seen that. The ogive measurements are going to be much more consistent and will give you a good cartridge base to ogive measurement to set your baseline off of. Okay, so with that, let's move over to the reloading presses and we'll kind of get into the method and explain a little bit of what I'm doing. Okay, so over the reloading press, I've got my resizing die set up, but before we go and resize this, let's talk through what I'm going to do and why. So the reason it's important to start with a fired case is because what I'm going to do now is go through and only resize about the first quarter of the neck. So the reason for that is because in the next step I'm going to seat the bullet in, but I'm going to seat the bullet just barely enough to be engaged by the case. And I just want the case to apply just enough tension to hold the bullet in place and not let it move freely, but still loose enough that it can be pressed in further. So the reason for that is because when I'm done with this, what I'm going to do is take the dummy round, and now just to make this clear, this needs to be a dummy round. No powder, no primers, just brass and your bullet. You do not want to do this with a live round. It is unsafe. Do not do it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my extra long loaded bullet in my loose case. I'm going to set that in my chamber, and I'm going to go ahead and close the bolt on the round. So what that's going to do is that is going to push the bullet forward until the ogive of the bullet contacts the rifling. Then by pushing my bolt forward, and because I've got a little tension in my case, it is actually going to push the case forward up into the bullet until the bolt closes, and then it is seated. And at that point, my case is pushed all the way forward in the chamber, but my bullet is resting on the rifling. So then we can pull that out and look at it, and as long as the bullet isn't deformed and that doesn't have any engravings, you know that the bullet was touching the rifling and the case got pushed up to it. So the dimensions from the cartridge base to the ogive is going to be the distance to your rifling. But let's go ahead and start resizing this. So we'll come in, like I said, just kind of the first quarter of the neck, just barely get it started. And you can kind of examine the ring on the case, and it looks like that was pretty good. Just the first little bit sized. So I have now changed out my resizing die for my seating die, and what I've done is I've applied quite a bit of case lube to the bullet before I'm going to seat it. And like I said, the reason for that is we don't want friction between the bullet and the case. We want the case to just barely be able to hold the bullet in position so that it doesn't move freely without influence. So we'll get the bullet set in my seater die. I'm going to come in and just barely feel for when that bearing surface of the bullet is engaged in the case. If you see right there, that bullet is sticking out quite a ways from the case, and that should be good to start. So let's move back over to the rifle and actually get our measurement. Alright, so now back to the rifle. I've got my long loaded dummy round. Once again, dummy round. No primers, no powder. Cannot stress this enough. Okay, so I'm going to push the bullet in my chamber. Like I said, we want just enough tension on the case so that when we close the bolt and push it forward, the bullet is going to be pushed back into the case by the rifling, and the rifling is not going to engage in the bullet. So before I did this, I also applied a little bit of case lube to the external surface of the bullet, just to give a little bit more lubricity, just to try to make sure that nothing sticks and nothing engraves or engages. So as you can see, my bolt's going right there, so that means my bullet is now touching the rifling. I can't close my bolt all the way, so I'm just going to go ahead and push that forward, and cam it down and use that leverage to help me push the bullet in a little bit. So bolt's fully closed. That means the cartridge is as far forward as it's going to go. Now let's open that up and pull it out. So now, because we had the bullet contacting the rifling, I'm going to go through and check the bullet and make sure that there's no deformation from the rifling, meaning that it didn't get shoved into the rifling, that it just got pushed back into the case. So everything looks good. Let's take our comparator and let's see what measurement we get. Okay, so what I end up with right here is a cartridge base to ogive length of 2.250. And there you go. So now to set my jump, because I know my maximum cartridge length for this bullet, I'm just going to set my resizing die back and move my bullet down about 20 thousandths of an inch to start about 20 thou off the lands, and that's typically a good place to start for your load development. And there you go. So hopefully you learned something, hopefully you enjoyed it, and thank you.